Oh, hello. So today we are back doing the second half of a project that I started last week, which was last week I reacted to 5-star reviews of 1-star books for me. And this week we are doing the opposite, which is I will be reacting to 1-star reviews of books that I gave 5 stars to. So I'm expecting to have my sweet little feelings completely trampled upon. Not really. Like, basically, I think I mentioned this in the last video. I tend to be somebody who really just believes, hey, you do you, boo. You're gonna like things that I don't like. I'm gonna like things that you don't like, unless there's something, you know, truly deeply objectionable about it. Mostly, I'm just always thrilled that somebody's reading, and even if they hate something that I love or vice versa, it's all good. So I'm expecting that this will mostly just be being like, but okay, that's fine. And I think one thing I found in the last video was that a lot of the things that I hated, people loved in their reviews. So I'm expecting that this may end up being kind of similar, that things that I love about a book may just be something that somebody else hates about a book. So we'll hop on Goodreads and we'll find out. So this week I'm gonna do 3 books. One, which is one of my favorite books of the year that's been out long enough that I think it has sufficient number of reviews. And then 2 books that I think are very strongly associated with me and like books that I have propagated to a lot of people. So I thought that would probably be an appropriate little random sampling here. So the first book we're going to do is Jane Doe by Victoria Helen Stone, aka Victoria Doll. And I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book. It totally worked for me. I love the character of Jane Doe. Really, this is like a character study of her. And I loved being in her head. She's basically a sociopath. She is kind of on a revenge plot. And I think that this book plays a lot with expectations set for women and what would happen if women just like completely owned those expectations and used them to their own advantage. So I really love this book. I could see this, it's a very strong flavor. So I don't think it's gonna be a flavor for everyone. So I could see that other people would just not enjoy it. But let's hop on in here. Okay, the first one I see is a DNF. Here's a good meaty one. So this person says that they originally gave this 2 stars because like it was fine, it was okay, but I bumped it down to 1 star because frankly it is bonkers that this has a 4.04 average rating on Goodreads. That is so funny. Okay. Just like out of spite. What this person is saying, the main character spends the entire book waxing endlessly about how she's a sociopath and doesn't feel or love, and she's so different from normal people, but like what about her is so sociopathic? Okay, this review has some spoilers in it, so I'm gonna just sort of run through here. Basically, she gives a list of things that she says are evidence that the character gives for her sociopathy, but that she thinks seem to be pretty reasonable, or things that are not that atypical. And like, why does that make her a sociopath? I love that she lists that loves cats and is a lawyer. Arguably the most convincing argument that she is a sociopath. I enjoy that little jab. Okay, I hear what she's saying. I think that part of the point the book is making, or like part of what I took away from it, is that sociopathy is actually not that uncommon. So like, yeah, a lot of these things are not necessarily that uncommon in terms of life experiences. Like, I agree with that, but I think really it's about how those life experiences then influence somebody's kind of psychological makeup. And so I think it's like 10% of the population there's at least have sociopathy to at least some degree. So I don't disagree, it's not unusual, but I think what this book is doing is really interrogating or like living in the mind space of somebody who has that and like is actually naming it as such. But I take the point. I think that's fair enough. That it's not, I can see a reading of this book where it can be a she's not like other girls. That's not how I read it, but I see that critique. And then she's saying that there's a lack of plot and tension. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. That's why I hesitate to call this a mystery thriller. And I guess it's a thriller in the broadest sense, but really I think of this as a character study. So I don't disagree, and if you come to the book expecting a ton of plot, I think you would be disappointed with it. 2D characterization, I could see what she's talking about. Okay, yeah, like smug liberal feminist ideology with zero critical engagement on how misogyny is embedded in women's lives beyond men love boobs. So I guess I can see all of these critiques. I don't agree with all of them, but I can see them. Ultimately, this book is fine. It's a self-insert revenge fantasy. It's the Twilight of thrillers. So I disagree with that. that, but that was this person's experience of reading the book. So, I mean, I don't think any of this was like wildly off base. Okay, the next one is, I guess the main attraction of this novel should be the narration of the main character, Jane, who is, in her own words, a sociopath. The plot is fairly simple. Let's see here. The insight into the mind of a sociopath is not a novel thing in thrillers, and many authors wrote it with more or less success. This book is like when you tell a kid to draw a sky, a grass, a house, and a sun. You know how it looks like there's a line right across the middle in the upper sky, but in reality, the situation is a lot more complex than that, just like people are complex. It's a bit crude comparison, but the basic premise in this novel is depicted kind of like that drawing. It's a skewed, simplified view of characters and their actions, especially in terms of Jane's so often mentioned sociopathy. So basically, I think what this person is getting at is that they found that this was a very two-dimensional, like, I think that they are seeing that this was a character study, but that they just found it to not be sufficiently in-depth. And this is a pretty long review, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but the reality is I think that this is just like a disagreement. Like, I found there to be, I'm not going to say that this is like the deepest character study I've ever read, but I didn't find it to be overall 2D cartoonish. I actually think, I've seen both of these reviews mention that the antagonist is drawn kind of 2D, and I can see that critique, but I took that piece of the book to be, that's Jane's perception of this person. Again, I'm not going to say that there's nothing to that. Like, I don't know that we get a ton of fleshing out of that antagonist, but I think that it's not like wildly out of alignment with people that I've known, or people, I think I may be sympathetic to it because, frankly, I'm from the Deep South. There are a lot of men of this ilk around that I have encountered, so it may be my own bias of like, oh, I know that guy. So it probably, I may be giving the book more credit than it deserves in terms of fleshing that out, just because I already know that type pretty well. So anyway, I think that it's a thoughtful review. I disagree with it, but I don't think it's, again, wildly off base. So both of those I think were very credible review. Oh, here we go. I was wondering if this would come up. This person says, I feel like this author just really hates men. Like, this is kind of absurd. It's interesting to see a woman be a sociopath. I like that aspect, but that was it. The revenge was weak, and I didn't like any of the characters except maybe Luke. So, and it was straightforward, and there was no guessing or mystery in this novel. So first of all, I wondered if somebody would bring up this idea of like, she just hates men. And I will say, having read a number of this author's work under various pen names, like, I don't think that's a reasonable interpretation of the authorial position. I think that in most of Victoria Dahl's novels, like, there's a warmth towards men in general. So I don't feel like that's a real valid critique. This is a book that's specifically exploring a specific character's antipathy towards a weakness that men have had socialized into them, in terms of men are socialized to see women in a certain way, and the character of Jane Doe does have active contempt for that socialization and uses it to her advantage. So that's kind of the point of the book. It doesn't mean that the author herself hates men. And again, the other thing that I was expecting to see a few times in here is this straightforward and no guessing or mystery in this novel. I think that marketing this as a mystery thriller is probably like not always finding the right people, because I don't think that really plot-wise is exactly what this is. So anyway, I guess my takeaway from this is like, these are mostly, I think, pretty, valid points that I may disagree with or have interpreted a different way, but overall, I can see most of those things. So next we are going to do a book that jokingly in live stream comes up almost every week, because people just know that I have recommended this to so many people, and almost every week there's some new person saying like, oh, I finally read this and I loved it. And that is All Systems Red by Martha Wells, the first in the Murderbot Diary series. I will say, percentage wise, there's so few 1 stars, so that's exciting. Okay, well, I see the first review and it's coming in hot, especially considering that this person says that they DNF'd it at 27%. They say it's only 144 pages too. That's how shit it is. This book is absolute shit. This is all caps. This book is absolute shit. I just want to make that very clear. The writing is mediocre shit too. Barely any description of what the technology actually looks like. There's no description on the settings either. There were other things I hated, but the story having no description was the worst part. Well, okay, that's a very interesting critique. So guess I can see where this person's coming from if like a lot of description of the technology or the setting is something that they value. I guess I would say in a novella, I'm not necessarily expecting a lot of that. Like the part of the form of the novella is you don't necessarily get that much description. It's more about like enough description to create the world. And, you know, I would submit that maybe if they read a little bit more, they probably would have picked up more on that. Now, I will say it's not spoon-fed to you. Like, you do have to kind of work in that novella to figure out exactly what's going on in terms of the world and the setting. But I felt like that was something the author was in control of. So if you just didn't like it, which this person clearly doesn't, I guess that's fair enough. But I don't really think that's a flaw of the book. This is really funny. I actually really like this review. It's making me laugh. The main character is a murder bot that has social anxiety. It's not done in a relatable way at all. Can I just say that the term relatable in reviews is like my number one like warning sign? I'm sure I've used that at some point, but overall, people who prize relatability in their characters over everything else, I'm always like, ooh, okay. But then it says, OMG, they hate me because I'm a robot. It's just said over and over again. The main character just feels awkward around humans. Later on, the story points out that since the main character is a robot, it has no gender and doesn't care about sex. Again, there's a whole paragraph on this, and it doesn't feel naturally integrated into the story at all. Look, I'm trying to be diverse. Oh, okay. Well, now we've had 2 red flags, so I'm going to say officially not necessarily that into this review. So the relatable thing is always a kind of red flag, and now I've seen a second one. I'm trying to be diverse. So I think I'm going to submit that this person possibly has some issues with diverse viewpoints being integrated into books. I don't know that for a fact, but anybody who calls out diversity as some sort of like add-on to the book or somebody who prizes relatability over everything else, that's always a little bit of a... I do love, I'm not actually sure what a murderbot is yet, but I'm not reading the whole thing to find out. Okay, so I would say that this book was just not for this person. I wouldn't say that that's, to my mind, a super valid critique, but the next one says, All Systems Red was a complete miss for me. The fact that this is a super short novella and it still took me 4 days to read it tells you a lot. I like the idea behind the story, but the narration was just plain boring and didn't do it for me. So it seems like both of these people are citing a style issue, and I can sympathize with that because I think that if you don't, for me, that's one of the main things that will make me DNF a book is style, because if you just don't connect with the author's voice, to me, it is pretty hard to overcome that. So I think that's fair enough. Short stories have never been my thing, and my inability to enjoy this novella only proves it. If you are a fan of short stories, do not be discouraged by my rating, but from my subjective point of view, it's not worth your money, so rather get a library copy as I did myself. I think that, to me, that's a really fair, credible review. Basically, this person is just saying, like, this was not for me. Take this with a grain of salt. So, you know, I don't really have anything I can say against that, and I appreciate that kind of review because I think that person gave enough information to give somebody else a sense of if it might work better for them. The next one says, I am pretty surprised that this novella has high ratings from readers and has won awards. It did nothing for me. The characters were weak, the world building was weak, and too much was left unexplained. Most especially the plot followed immediately by the hybrid nature of the security robot, maybe 1.5 stars. Again, to me, that's part of what you're coming to the novella for, is that you don't need the full world building. And again, this does speak to some of my preferences because in both sci-fi and fantasy, I'm somebody who tends to find too much world building to be really distracting. And I think I've used the term masturbatory for that before. Like, it just doesn't feel like it's adding anything to the story usually, like often, and it feels more like the author is just trying to like show off what they've done. But clearly, I mean, I've always known this, other people just really enjoy that in a way that I do not. So, and I'm just looking through a couple of these others. A lot of people are just talking about how it wasn't fleshed out enough for them. And all of this, I mean, I can see that. I think if you were coming to this expecting a super fleshed out world with a lot of details and a lot of character development or whatever, yeah, I mean, like, I could see that being a disappointment for you. I guess I would just say that that's part of the joy of a novella, is that you don't have to get, like, you don't get into as much of that. And the craft of a novella done well is the author's ability to not have to give you like every detail, but still have you fully immersed in the story. And for me, it definitely did that. Okay, so then the last one is, I'm gonna look at the 1-star reviews for Kate Daniels' Magic Breaks, which is my favorite of the Kate Daniels series. And I will say there's more than 40,000 reviews and only 127 1-stars. I will say if you've gotten this far in the series, I'm assuming that there's most people are gonna probably like it pretty well. So anyway, one person just says, I love Kate Daniels, but enough is enough. I guess maybe they were just sick of the series by that point, I don't know. This is the kind of book that is only for people who like this kind of book. Isn't that true of every book? Okay. Apparently it's part of a series, and it's Magic Witches and Constant Death are not for me. Oh my gosh, this is like one of my favorite reviews I've ever read. Basically like, this is the kind of book that if you like this kind of book, you'll like. Okay. And he didn't know it was part of a series. This is just, it was not for him. I think he was accurate in saying that. Okay, this person says, I've read way too many good books this month. It makes me realize how much this book bothered me in comparison. I'm so sick of the alpha dude's super protective male love interest. It's especially grating in these books where theoretically Kat can defend herself. I just wish in one of these books the authors would lay off that trope. Interesting. I mean, so I will say that the Kate Curran dynamic in this series is based off of the Eve Rourke dynamic in the In Death series. And I think one of the innovations of that dynamic in romance between Eve and Rourke was that basically it was two really tough characters in conflict and relationship with each other. And I think that this book does that pretty well. And to this person's point, yeah, like Kate is very competent, but it's in Curran's like literal intrinsic nature as a lion shifter to be very territorial and protective. So for me, I tend to give, like, if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fair enough. But in urban fantasy or paranormal series, I tend to have more grace for those kinds of things because like there's literally a magical reason why somebody might be behaving that way. And like I said, there's this kind of give and take in the relationship. So it's interesting. I guess I can see that, but it just, I guess, doesn't bother me. It's pretty standard fare for this series. That I disagree with. This was the culmination of the second arc of the 3 arcs in the series. And this book like brought the house down. I loved it. It was enjoyable enough to listen to in the audiobook format. Okay, good to know. First half of the book is pretty slow. I might try the next book since this one wrapped up a pretty big plot, and I'm curious to see where the series goes from here. I guess then I just question why you gave, like, if you have any interest in continuing, I'm interested that you gave this a 1 star, but maybe that's just a difference in how people rate it. And then there's actually only one other non-spoiler review, and somebody just says, I'm done. I can't find Kate Daniels in the series anymore. It's like series for moms, you know, wedding kids, love, bullshit, pack drama, WTF. I don't even really know what that means, but okay, this person's just over the series. And that's it, man. Like the rest are just 1 stars without any discussion. So, I guess that, like I said, I guess that makes sense. If you've gotten to book 7 in the series, unless you're like that one guy who was like, apparently this is a part of a series, you're probably not going to hate the book and give it 1 star. And like I said, it has a 4.5 star rating with more than 40,000 reviews because, again, I think this is the best book in the series, but it's a really well-loved book in the fandom. So I guess it's not that surprising that there's not a ton of negative reviews. So there you go. Maybe that one was not a good one to pick, but it makes me feel better because I'm like, well, yeah, everybody loves this book. So yeah, those were some reactions to people not liking books that I love. Again, I think especially in the Jane Doe one, things I can see, but things I guess I just either didn't bother me or I disagree with ultimately. So there you go. Let me know what you thought of any of these books, and if you like this concept, I can always do it again. So let me know if you guys like these 2 videos, and maybe I can try doing this again. But yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, along with a link to register to vote. And even though it is probably too late to register to vote in this election, you should certainly register to vote for future elections, and you should make a plan to vote. Are you gonna early vote? Are you gonna mail in? Are you gonna go in person? Etc., etc. Make a plan. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. Hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!